Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine the moment you walk back to the home you've shared with your spouse for years, only to find that the lock won't turn. You're standing at the threshold, carrying the weight of your grief, only to realize this house isn't yours anymore. The place where your love grew, where your dreams were built, is now occupied by someone else. It's a cold, heart-wrenching moment that will change everything. But what if this isn't just about losing a home? What if it's about reclaiming your power, finding the strength to fight back when life strips you of everything you thought you could count on? Stay with us, because this is only the beginning. What would you do if the life you built with someone was suddenly taken away from you? Let's dive into this emotional journey together. The morning felt colder than it should have. Rachel stood at the threshold of the house she once called home, clutching the bouquet of wilting roses in one hand, the weight of the overnight bag in the other. She had returned from St. Matthew's Memorial Hospital just a few hours ago, where her world had crumbled. Her husband, Michael, was gone. The hospital sheets still lingered in her memory, the sterile smell, the beeping machines, and then silence. She hadn't been prepared for this. Not for the ache of losing him, not for the silence that awaited her at the house. She hadn't been ready for the key to refuse to turn. The lock, stubborn and cold, denied her access, as though it had forgotten who she was. No matter how many times she tried, the door wouldn't open. Panic gnawed at her, and she fumbled for the spare key hidden behind the porch stone, the one they joked about when they first moved in, pretending it was a secret from the world. It, too, betrayed her. That was when she noticed the curtains, the white linen ones she'd carefully sewn herself, gone, replaced by thick, garish velvet panels in a floral print she'd never seen before. Her stomach churned. She leaned closer to the window, squinting through the narrow gap between the wall and the fabric. The living room was no longer the place she and Michael had shared laughter and quiet mornings. Instead, it was cluttered with boxes, cardboard towers where once there was clean space. And then she saw them. Diana, her mother-in-law, sat in her chair, a navy cardigan draped over her shoulders like a queen's robe, sipping tea from the wedding china that Michael and Rachel had saved for years. Jocelyn, his younger sister, was tossing throw blankets into a basket. They were laughing. They had moved in, and they hadn't even waited for the body to cool before they began to stake their claim. Rachel's heart stuttered as she knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time, her fists trembling. A hollow, desperate sound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door cracked open. Diana's figure filled the frame, poised, arms crossed as though she had been preparing for this moment for years. "Rachel," she said, her voice smooth, almost mocking. "Didn't expect you so soon." "What's going on?" Rachel's voice trembled. "Why can't I open the door?" Diana leaned against the frame, her smile unwavering. "Because, dear, you don't live here anymore." Rachel's breath caught. She blinked, trying to process what she just heard. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Diana's smile didn't falter. "Michael paid for this house. My son, not you. There was no prenup, no child, no real contribution on your part. It's time this house returned to his real family." For a moment, Rachel thought the cold she felt was from the weather outside. But it wasn't. It came from Diana. "I'm his wife," Rachel whispered. "We bought this house together." "Oh, please," Diana scoffed, cutting her off with a dismissive wave. "You played house while he worked. Now that he's gone, your lease is up." Behind Diana, Jocelyn appeared, holding two of Rachel's serving plates, smiling smugly. "You left the side door unlocked when you went to the hospital," she said with a smirk. "We figured you wouldn't mind." Rachel's knees buckled. Her body rocked with disbelief, not out of humor, but out of something much deeper, something more painful. "What's so funny?" Diana asked, narrowing her eyes. Rachel steadied herself, wiping away a tear she didn't even know had fallen. "You're unpacking pillows and pouring tea in a house you think belongs to you," she said slowly. "But you have no idea what you've just stepped into." Diana's smile faltered, just for a second. That was all Rachel needed. Turning on her heel, she walked back to her car. The keys in her hand were useless now, but she had something better, something Diana had no idea about. 2 years ago, almost to the day, Rachel sat on this very porch, watching Michael run his hands through his hair in frustration. The weight of his business failure had taken a toll. Their home was at risk. They had almost lost it all. And that was when Rachel had made a decision. Quietly, without a word to Michael, she drove to the credit union and began the process of refinancing the mortgage in her name. She'd used the small savings she'd kept hidden, her nest egg from her days as an interior designer. Michael never asked questions. He was too caught up in trying to recover emotionally from the crushing weight of failure. Rachel kept everything afloat, paying the bills, fixing the faucets, budgeting for groceries. She had done it all without anyone knowing, and certainly without Diana ever suspecting. But now, it was time to take back what was hers. Rachel sat in her car outside the house, the cold air creeping under her coat. How do you process being widowed and homeless on the same day? She didn't cry. She didn't know how to anymore. The silence in the house haunted her, but it was nothing compared to what she was about to do. That night, after a sleepless, restless wait, Rachel did something she never imagined herself doing. She picked up the phone and called the funeral home. She needed to update the guest list for Michael's service. She paused for a moment, then made the change. Remove Diana Monroe and Jocelyn Monroe from the list. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't spite. It was a boundary. The first one she'd ever drawn in over a decade of silence. Do you think Rachel made the right choice by confronting her mother-in-law immediately? Or should she have waited for a more strategic moment? How far would you go to protect the legacy of a loved one, especially when others try to erase it? Rachel's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing for what came next, and the next move, she knew, would be hers. Rachel walked back to the motel room, her mind racing with the sting of the conversation with Diana still burning in her chest. She had done what she needed to do, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, like she had merely moved one step out of the shadows of this house and the cold grip of her mother-in-law. The room felt claustrophobic when she stepped inside, as though the walls were closing in, squeezing out her breath. The drab colors of the walls, the threadbare carpet. Nothing about it spoke of the woman she once was. The woman who had been proud of her home, her life, her marriage. Now she was someone else, someone whose identity was wrapped up in a fight for what was left. The walls around her pressed in with their own weight, the weight of grief, of betrayal, and the overwhelming sense of loss. Rachel stared at the black folder she had kept hidden beneath the bed. She knew she had to confront it. Not because she wanted to, but because there was something waiting inside. Something she couldn't ignore. She reached for it, fingers trembling as she slid it open. The postnuptial agreement, Michael's final defense, the one he had signed without her knowing. At first, Rachel had thought it was a safety net, a shield against the world, but now, as she stared at the paper in her hand, it felt like a noose. The weight of it crushed her chest. She wasn't sure if it was the legal terms, the ink that had dried as a symbol of ownership, or the fact that it had been Michael's final act to protect her. She wasn't sure. All she knew was that it made her feel more alone, more abandoned. The one person she had trusted, the one person who had promised to share a future with her, had left her to carry the burden of his absence and the battle for everything they had built together. There was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. She froze, her heartbeat quickening. She didn't want to answer it, but something, an instinct, a voice inside her, urged her to get up. To face whatever this was. She walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Diana stood there, her posture as cold and imposing as ever, like she was waiting for something. Rachel hesitated for a moment, but she knew that she couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. She opened the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Rachel," Diana said, her voice thick with something Rachel couldn't place, maybe pity, maybe something darker. She was flanked by the same lawyer, Mr. Langley, who stood stiffly behind her. Diana's eyes were narrowed, a calculated smile on her lips. "I thought you'd be expecting me," Diana continued, her tone honeyed but with a sharp edge. "You've made quite the scene already, haven't you?" Rachel stood firm. "What do you want?" Diana's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "I want what's rightfully mine. Michael's estate, his belongings." She stepped forward as though she had every right to be there. "And now that you've made a mess of things, we need to fix this." Rachel didn't move. She could feel the tension in her muscles, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "This is my house," she said, her voice steady, though it trembled inside her. "This is my life. You've taken enough." Diana's eyes flickered with something dangerous. "You think you've won, Rachel? You think this post-nuptial agreement will protect you? You're a fool." Her words were sharp, cutting deeper than any knife. Before Rachel could respond, Mr. Langley stepped forward. "Mrs. Monroe," he began, his voice low and careful, "we've been instructed to begin legal proceedings. You've clearly made some arrangements, but none of this is as clear-cut as you think. Diana has every right to challenge your claim." Rachel's heart dropped. She hadn't expected this. She thought the fight was over. She thought the agreement was enough to secure her place. But now, it seemed like Diana had something more in her arsenal. "I'm not going anywhere," Rachel said, though the uncertainty crept into her voice. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Diana or to herself. Diana's smile returned, colder than before. "We'll see about that." She turned away, walking toward the driveway, her heels clicking on the pavement. Langley followed her, but Rachel stayed at the door, watching them leave. The weight of the situation crushed her chest, but it wasn't just Diana she had to fight. It was the guilt that gnawed at her, the overwhelming feeling of not knowing if she was doing the right thing anymore. She wasn't sure if she was protecting herself or if she was simply fighting out of spite. She wasn't sure if she was the person she used to be or someone else entirely. And then it hit her, the thing she had been ignoring, the thing she had been trying to avoid. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't about the agreement or the lawyer or Diana's cruel games. This was about Michael. And it wasn't just about what he had left behind or the promises he had made. It was about the fact that he was gone. He was never coming back. Rachel sank to the floor, the weight of the realization crashing down on her. The anger she had felt moments ago dissolved, replaced by a hollowness that made her feel smaller, more fragile. She wasn't just fighting for the house or the estate. She was fighting for a life that was no longer hers, for a future she could never have. What do you think Rachel should do next? Is it possible to separate the fight for her home from her need to let go of Michael's memory? The room around Rachel grew darker as the realization settled into her bones. The stakes had changed. Now the only thing left was to decide how far she was willing to go, to fight, to protect, or to finally let go. And that was a decision that would change everything. Rachel woke to the sound of a car engine idling outside her motel room, its hum faint yet persistent, like a ghost from her past that wouldn't leave. It had been 3 days since Diana had shown up at her door, 3 days since the confrontation that had shaken Rachel's already fragile foundation. She had expected to wake up in a panic, to feel the weight of the house she was fighting for pressed down on her chest again. But instead, there was only a quiet, unbearable peace. The kind that comes from surviving something so deep, so visceral, that it no longer feels real. She stood at the window, watching Diana's car parked across the street again. It was too early, the sky still dark with the remnants of a long, painful night. Rachel hadn't slept much since the courtroom victory. It should have felt like a win. The gavel had come down in her favor. The house was officially hers, and yet, the victory tasted hollow. She hadn't expected Diana to give up that easily. Diana had been playing the long game, orchestrating a move so calculated it was impossible not to admire, despite its cruelty. Rachel had expected that, but what she hadn't expected was the slow, relentless ache that filled her chest when Diana didn't retreat, when she remained, a specter in the corners of Rachel's life. She couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she did, Diana's presence would forever haunt her. But Rachel had never been the kind of woman to run from her fears, and she wasn't about to start now. With a deep breath, she stepped outside, the cool morning air biting at her skin. Her bare feet made contact with the cold pavement as she walked toward the porch, her gaze locked on the car across the street. The tires were still warm, the engine still faintly humming. Rachel didn't know what she expected to happen next, whether Diana would make another attempt to stake her claim, or if this was just another lingering thread of a battle that had already been fought and won. But this time, Rachel was ready. Ready to close the door once and for all. The car door opened slowly, and Diana stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. She was dressed in black, of course. Always in black, like the widow she thought she was meant to be. Her expression was calm, but Rachel saw the edge of something else in her eyes. Something darker. Something that made Rachel's pulse quicken with dread. "Rachel," Diana said, her voice low, as if trying to sound kind. "We need to talk." Rachel took a step forward, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe. "Talk about what?" she asked, though she knew the answer. She had been through this dance before. Diana would try again to wrest control from her, to manipulate the situation into something it wasn't. But Rachel wasn't the same woman she had been when she first walked into that courtroom. She wasn't afraid of her anymore. "I've thought about it," Diana continued, her tone still smooth, still too perfect, "and I realize now, I may have acted out of turn. I was grieving, Rachel. You have to understand. I've lost Michael, too." Rachel clenched her jaw, the anger rising in her throat. "You didn't lose him, Diana. You never understood him. You never knew him the way I did." Her voice broke on the last words, but she didn't care. For too long, she had silenced her emotions, held them back for fear of making waves. But now she was done hiding. Diana's face darkened, her mask slipping for just a moment. "You think you know him better than I do?" she spat. "You think you're the only one who loved him? I gave him life. I raised him. He was mine before he was yours." The words hit Rachel like a slap, sharp and cold. She took a breath, steadying herself. She wasn't going to let Diana win. Not now. Not ever. "No, Diana," Rachel said, her voice calm but unwavering. "He was never yours. He was his own. And the life we built together, what we created, is not for you to take." Her eyes locked onto Diana's, daring her to argue. "I've buried Michael. I've let him go. But you'll never have him. Not again." Diana's face twisted in something that could have been rage or shame. Rachel couldn't tell. She watched her mother-in-law take a step back, as if the weight of Rachel's words had physically knocked her off balance. Then, with a final venomous look, she turned and walked back to her car, her heels clicking against the pavement, fading into the distance. Rachel stood there for a long time, her hands trembling at her sides. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of everything she had lost, of everything she had fought for. But then, just as quickly, the strength of her conviction returned. She had fought, and she had won. But winning wasn't enough. She wasn't just reclaiming the house. She was reclaiming herself. Later that day, after the car had driven away and the silence in the street had returned, Rachel stood in the garden, her hands buried in the soil. She planted the marigolds, the ones Michael had loved so much, and let the warm spring sun kiss her skin. It was as though with every seed she planted, she was planting a new version of herself, stronger, more resilient, less afraid. The house was hers. The garden was hers. And for the first time in weeks, Rachel felt at peace. But just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a message from Angela, her attorney, the one who had been with her through the legal battle. Rachel opened it, only to find a simple sentence that made her blood run cold. "Diana's filed another petition. She's not done." Rachel stared at the screen, her fingers frozen on the glass. She had thought it was over. She had thought she was free. But freedom, she realized, wasn't something anyone could give her. It was something she would have to take. What do you think Rachel should do next? Will she finally find peace, or is there still a battle left to fight? As Rachel stood there in the fading light of the evening, she knew the fight wasn't over. It never would be. But this time, she would be ready for whatever came next.